people on the tech desk who are struggling through the hybrid service. They are also doing a great job. Thank you so much. Now is the time for us to learn more about the 8th principle and what it means for this Unitarian Universalist community. Unitarians, Universalists, and Unitarian Universalists have a long history of grappling with issues of racial equity and justice. Sometimes we have risen to the occasion, fighting for the abolition of slavery, showing up in the Deep South to witness for civil rights, donning yellow Side with Love t-shirts as we work for immigration and criminal justice reform. These are the stories we tell ourselves about race. This is the history that we share with our children. But sometimes we have failed miserably to affirm and promote the inherent worth and dignity of Black, Brown, Indigenous, and other people of color. Sometimes you'll hear that referred to as BIPOC. Many prominent Unitarians enthusiastically embraced a eugenics movement that was largely motivated by racial and class prejudice and openly advocated for the forced sterilization of people they deemed unfit. Too many of our congregations, when offered the option, have repeatedly failed to call qualified BIPOC candidates to serve as parish ministers. Our denominational leadership has denied money to UU groups working for racial equity and have starved initiatives designed to help us become a truly anti-racist, anti-oppressive, multicultural institution. This is the history that makes us a little uncomfortable. These are the things that we don't talk about. As we heard earlier in the story, recently, UU leaders have begun to realize that there's something missing at the core of Unitarian Universalism that makes it possible for us to ignore our uncomfortable history and avoid doing the work that we need to do to address systemic racism and the harm that it causes. More and more Unitarian Universalists are beginning to believe that we need to make some structural changes, and a good place to start would be a new guiding principle. Today, you'll have an opportunity to hear what Rev G, Amanda and Nick, and myself think about the proposed 8th principle of Unitarian Universalism and why we believe that now is the time to adopt it for our own. We'll start with Reverend G.
Hello and welcome. We are now very fortunate that we can have a hybrid service. So I welcome all of you who are here in the sanctuary and all of you on the mighty interwebs. If you're joining us now, I am Reverend G, and I am absolutely delighted that you have chosen to spend this time with us in person or online, however it is right and true for you in the moment. Today, we have a special service, one that we have created together with our youth. And I have a small part to play. They are really creating the majority of this service. And I am going to speak about the 8th principle that Unitarian Universalists are talking about adopting. The reason I'm speaking about this is because our youth are fired up about it. And also because as I am reading it, I am also wondering, what would it say about us if we did not adopt it? If you are new to Unitarian Universalism, then you need to know that we do not have creeds or dogmas. Instead, we have some principles that we have found to be true, and we have 7 of them, and I am going to read them to you. And if you are not new to Unitarian Universalism, then I'm sure you will enjoy this little refresher. So the first principle is, and all of them begin like this: we, the member congregations of the Unitarian Universalist Association, covenant to affirm and promote. Principle 1: the inherent worth and dignity of every person. Number 2: justice, equity, and compassion in human relations. 3: acceptance of one another and encouragement to spiritual growth in our congregations. 4: a free and responsible search for truth and meaning. 5: the right of conscience and the use of the democratic process within our congregations and in society at large. 6: the goal of world community with peace, liberty, and justice for all. And number 7, respect for the interdependent web of all existence, of which we are a part. Now, let me give you just a little bit of background of where I come from as far as my religious experience is concerned. First, I started out as atheist. Then later on, when I was 14, I had an experience, and it came to me that there's got to be something greater in the world than just me. That maybe there is some greater thing, and I didn't know where to go to look for that connection, that interconnectedness, that interconnected web of life that I'm a part of. I had an awakening that there's got to be more to life than me. I just didn't know where to look for it. So, because when I was 14, I still lived in communism, and spirituality, of course, was discouraged there. Churches were still open, although we were discouraged from attending. Nonetheless, I went to church because I thought this is a spiritual matter. I should explore it in the church. And then I thought later that I had a call to become a minister. So I pursued that. And being a product of that country of Transylvania, where I grew up, and having been Hungarian, I had Hungarians had 2 religions, practiced 2 religions, either Catholic or Reformed, which is Protestant, Calvinist, really Calvinist. So I happened to have been baptized into the Calvinist church, Reformed church. So that's the one that I started attending and decided to become a minister. And I did become a minister, and it was a very conservative church. Not conservative enough to not allow women as ministers, but in every other aspect, pretty darn conservative. And as life would have it, I experienced many things in life, and I started questioning my faith, and I started questioning this belief system that I adopted, the dogmas that the Reformed Church espoused. And I became an alumni of the Reformed Church, but really I was so troubled by the whole belief system, and I had an either-or mindset. I really became an alumni of religion and church altogether. And it took me a long time to come around, and then I started attending Unity. And it's a funny story. When I attended Unity and people would ask me what church I attend, I would say Unity, and they'd say, "Oh, Unitarian?" And then I would say, no, no, unity. And now that I am a Unitarian Universalist minister, and I tell people, oh, I'm a Unitarian Universalist minister, they say, oh, unity? It's very funny, as love and life would have it. Started attending Unity, where, again, they don't have dogmas and belief systems. They have 5 principles instead that they adhere to, that they found to be true, and most attendees of Unity espouse them. So I left there as well, and I became a Unitarian Universalist. And I tell you, why is it possible, and why do I love being a Unitarian Universalist? And why is it possible for me to be here and remain here? Because, again, there's no dogma, but it's not just that. These 7 principles that I read to you, we are finding them to be true, and they're not carved in stone. We are willing and we are open to consider them, reconsider them. If need be, we are willing to alter them. And if need be, we are willing to add to them. There is room here for the evolution of consciousness, evolution of understanding, evolution of thinking, and evolution of healing. And hence, and thus, the 8th principle was introduced. It hasn't been yet adopted by the Unitarian Universalist Association, although there are a great number of churches who have adopted this principle already. And allow me to read it to you. Our youth are fired up about it. Our youth are loving it. Our youth are encouraging us, the adults, to take it on, to be also one of those congregations who adopt it before the UUA adopts it. The more congregations adopt it before the UUA comes together at the General Assembly, the easier it will be to pass it. Here is how it is formed. We, the member congregations of the Unitarian Universalist Association, covenant to affirm and promote, journeying toward spiritual wholeness by working to build a diverse, multicultural, beloved community by our actions that accountably dismantle racism and other oppressions in ourselves and our institutions. This 8th principle was introduced to us by our BIPOC brothers and sisters. And of course, our Black brothers and sisters have long suffered discrimination in society at large. But truth be told, they have suffered discrimination within our congregations as well. And this is their invitation to take a look at ourselves and accountably dismantle racism and other oppressions in ourselves. Because as within, so without. As within, so without. If I wish this world to be free of racism, the work begins here. If this isn't squared away, that which I contribute to the collective consciousness is racism, maybe overt, maybe covert, unconscious, but racism. And then where there is racism, there is no healing, no possibility for healing. So here we are called to accountably step into the space where healing can occur, where we can build a beloved community that is diverse, that is multicultural, that is free of racism and other forms of oppression. It is an aspirational invitation, and we are invited to look at ourselves, look at our communities, and see in how and in what ways are we contributing to division, to hurt, to discrimination, and eliminate those. And it requires of us to walk the talk. It requires of us to get comfortable with discomfort. Because looking at ourselves and into ourselves will inadvertently mean that at times we will become very uncomfortable, especially when we realize the ways in which we have contributed to racism, to oppression. And instead of wallowing in shame and guilt, we are invited to heal that here, so we may be agents of healing out there, because as within, so without. If we adopt this principle, it will say a lot about us. It will also ask us to accountably start acting, to be accountable in the ways in which we make changes within and without. It will say a lot about us. And equally, if we choose not to adopt this principle, what will that say about us? Again, this is how the principle reads. We covenant to affirm and promote journeying toward spiritual wholeness by working to build a diverse, multicultural, beloved community by our actions that accountably dismantle racism and other oppressions in ourselves and our institutions. It will require us coming together as a congregation, as a community, to talk about this principle, to look at it from every aspect, every angle, before we adopt it. But the real work will begin once we adopt it. Because then we are called into integrity, we are called into accountability to heal the racism within, so we may heal the racism without, to heal the oppression within, so we may heal the oppression without, so we may live consciously in a way that we walk kindly, gently, and lovingly on this earth. I love Unitarian Universalism because it is constantly evolving. The last chapter has not been written. It is being written. And in perpetuity, it is being written as long as Unitarian Universalists exist and care to come together as a religious, faith, spiritual community as we build the beloved community. The last chapter is being written, and this 8th principle is just one of the chapters. So I do wish and I do hope that we will engage this conversation consciously, willingly, enthusiastically, as our youth will have us do it. It is my hope and wish that we will choose as one to adopt it, and then that we are truly going to show up for the work that is required of us once we do adopt it. And so it is.
Looking inside ourselves and coming to understand our views on race can be very uncomfortable for white people. I'm going to tell you a story. It's a little bit uncomfortable about my reckoning with race, because it has a lot to do why I think that we should adopt and act on the 8th principle. Sometimes in life we have aha moments where the scales fall from our eyes and everything changes in an instant. But other times we're a little bit slow on the uptake. It's like dipping a cheap tea bag into a cup of lukewarm water. Eventually you're going to get a cup of tea, but it's going to take a while. I am ashamed to say it has taken me so long to see the truth of this story. I am embarrassed at how old I am in this story when it takes place. I'm not a particularly young person at the time. And the reason for this is that I have been able to live almost my entire life in places where most everybody is white. From the town I grew up in, to the schools I attended, to the way I spent my free time, to the places that I worked. Being in safe white spaces sometimes makes it easy for white people to remain blissfully ignorant about race. The setting for this story is a Unitarian Universalist church. I am sitting in the pews. The service has just begun. Not too far from me sits a visitor. I know they are a visitor because we met for the first time when they came in the door, and they let me know this was the first time they had visited a Unitarian Universalist church. We go through the welcome and the chalice lighting, and it's time for the opening hymn. The white lay leader looks down at the order of service and says, "Oh, this is an African-American spiritual." And then they point to the visitor and said, "Would you like to come up and lead this song in the way of your people?" This visitor was one of only 1 or 2 Black people in the entire room. I cringed. This was wrong on many levels. The lay leader had made some pretty big assumptions about the visitor based on some racial stereotypes. All Black people are innately musical. All Black people will be familiar with spirituals because they grew up in the Black church. And calling on someone to represent their entire race in front of a group of people that don't look like them is, well, racist. To be sure, it is not hate-filled KKK, Jim Crow type of racism. And I know that the lay leader was not being intentionally hurtful. But these little uncomfortable slights, rooted in prejudice and stereotypes, these microaggressions are a painful and exhausting part of being Black in America. And I just watched one occur in the last place that it should occur, in a church. I looked around and it didn't seem like anyone else was outwardly as uncomfortable about this as I was. So I tried to figure out what I should do. Should I interrupt the service by saying, "Whoa, this is not cool"? It would probably make everyone uncomfortable. It would probably hurt the lay leader's feeling. But if I say nothing, is that sending a message that this is okay? In the end, the seconds ticked by. I squirmed a little in discomfort, but I did nothing. The visitor smiled and turned down the offer to lead the song, and the service went on like nothing unusual had happened. After the service, I did make a point to talk to the visitor, say I recognize what had happened and apologize. And they very graciously thanked me. I did not have the courage to do anything more than sit there, and yet they thanked me. And to make matters worse, they told me, don't worry about it, because things like this happen all the time when they are in mostly white spaces. Now, for the longest time, I convinced myself that I was a hero in the story. I didn't do anything wrong. I didn't do anything harmful. I reached out with compassion to the visitor after the service. I am not a racist. But as that story has sat and steeped, I have come to realize that none of that is true. I should not have let that microaggression go unchallenged. There is more I could have done. And perhaps the hardest truth for me to swallow is that despite everything that I teach others about our faith, deep down, I view Unitarian Universalist churches as just another one of my safe white spaces. There are places where I put the importance of not interrupting the service, not making people uncomfortable, not hurting a white person's feelings, on par or even above not causing harm to a Black person. This is a hard truth for me to learn about myself. This is not who I thought I was. But we know the first step to solving any problem is admitting we have one. BIPOC UUs tell us stories like this play out in UU churches all over the country, all the time. Some of the stories are much worse. They tell us that good white UUs too often sit in silence instead of speaking up. They tell us we need an eighth principle to help us fulfill the promise of what Unitarian Universalism can be. This is why I believe that now is the time for us to embrace this principle and bring it to life in ourselves and in the world. Now I'm going to turn it over to our youth, Amanda and Nick, and they're going to tell you why they think now is the time.
We believe now is the time for the UU Community Church to adopt and act on the eighth principle.
It is the next step in improving our church.
And a great way to address racial injustice in ourselves and the world.
It helps people to be clear for what we stand for.
It makes us examine what we say and do to make sure they reflect our best values.
It will help more people who come in through our door feel like they belong.
Now is the time.